Thank you. My remarks this afternoon are more or less a continuation of what I had been speaking about earlier with regard to the connection between National Socialism, Hitler, Nazi anti-Semitism, and jihadist anti-Semitism, when I spoke, from Hitler to Hamas. The foundational jihadist movement from the last century and into this century is the Muslim Brotherhood. As is the case with all of these movements, and very frequently, there is, I think, a woeful misunderstanding or misconception as to who they are. Whom are we dealing with when we deal with the Muslim Brotherhood? And this statement from James Clapper, the former director of U.S. National Intelligence, is an example when he, declared that the Brotherhood is a heterogeneous group, largely secular, which has eschewed violence. That's not exactly the case. Now, where does the Brotherhood come from? The Brotherhood stems from a modern rise of purist movements. National Socialism was a purist movement. The areas in which Jews were eliminated were called, areas that had been made Judenrein, purified or cleansed of the Jewish presence. Largely in response to modernity, to colonialism, and so on, you have purist movements of all sorts. Just a couple of examples in the Muslim world can be found in Wahhabism, founded in 1744 by Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab. Wahhabism, as you know, continues to be very prevalent in some parts of the Arab Muslim world, particularly Saudi Arabia. More directly connected in some ways to the advent of the Brotherhood is Salafism. Salafism arose in the mid-19th century through a circle of Muslim scholars and clerics, and although there are a few key figures, it's not just, they don't just have one founder exactly. One of the influential Salafists with regard to the emergence of the Brotherhood is Rashid Rida. Hassan al-Banna, who founded the Muslim Brotherhood in March of 1928, was heavily influenced by Rashid Rida. The British colonial presence is part of the context for the purist movements in Egypt, certainly, and Hassan al-Banna understood that. But with Rashid Rida, you have this, for al-Banna, he signifies a return to the pristine teachings of Islam. Another important figure in this evolution of influence and political Islamic thought is Abdul al-Maududi. Maududi was born in Lahore, in what is now Pakistan. He comes from that region, but he has had a huge influence on jihadist thinkers ever since the 1920s. He promotes the wedding of Islam and politics because he says that without a political power, Islam can never implement Sharia law. Islam can never oppose the evils of secularism, nationalism, colonialism. He adds women's emancipation, communism. So all of these things that threaten Islam can be opposed not through ideological or theological instruction. It requires political power. And Maududi actually expressed an admiration for the Nazis because they understood the necessity of power to ideology. He was the founder of the jihadist group Jamaat-e-Islami in India, Pakistan. So Hassan al-Banna is influenced by Rashid Rida, by Maududi, and by other Salafist thinkers, so that in March of 1928, he and half a dozen other men established the Muslim Brotherhood. And it's remarkable that a movement that began with so few has become so vast, as I hope I can show today. Now, what is their creed, as stated? Allah is our goal. Okay, so far so good. The Prophet is our leader. We can understand that. Quran is our law. Fair enough. Jihad is our way, where jihad means fighting others, spreading Islam through the sword. As Ruhollah Khomeini, who studied with the Muslim Brothers, once said, all things good and glorious that have come to Islam have come through the sword. And then finally, death in the service of Allah is our highest desire. Death in the service of Allah is the key that unlocks the door to paradise. And it isn't any old death, right? It's death in the pursuit of jihad. Death in the process of shedding the blood of the infidel, starting with, of course, with the Jews. You'll find that as we go through this, that anti-Semitism is foundational to Islamic jihadism. You can't have Islamic jihadism without anti-Semitism. You can't be a jihadist and be okay with the presence of Jews anywhere. Now, what is al-Banna? What does al-Banna? My God. What does al-Banna teach? What are his teachings? I mean, what draws so many to him? And Muslims from, not just from Egypt, from elsewhere, went to learn with him and the other Muslim brothers in the 1930s. He says, God has imposed jihad as a religious duty on every Muslim, from which there is neither evasion nor escape. To evade it is one of the 7 mortal sins that guarantee annihilation. There can be no conscientious objection. Now, what if I'm not in a position like me? Am I going to take up arms? How can I pursue jihad? By financially supporting jihad. The financial support of jihad for al-Banna is a way of meeting the requirement of zakat, of giving charity. It's one of the 5 pillars, right? So giving charity here is not just feeding the poor and feeding the hungry, helping the poor, housing the homeless, and so on. No. Giving charity entails ultimately killing Jews and others. He says, also, he's famous for this statement, the Quran commands us to love death more than life. Victory can come only with the mastery of the art of death, fan al-mat. he's known for this phrase, the art of death. Now notice, I mean, you might say for any human being, as a human being, death, in a way, is not just some natural accident that overcomes us after 70. Death, in a way, is a kind of task, is part of the testimony that we bring to life. Okay? Dying words. The ethical will in Jewish tradition. There's a tradition in Judaism that as you face death, you come near the end of your life, you leave a statement of teachings for your children that you want to leave with them. So death is a task we engage, and not just an accident that befalls us. And here too, the mastery of the art of death. Death is a task we engage, but what is the task? The task is to summon from within a capacity for strapping bombs on yourself, for dying fearlessly for the sake of jihad, for the sake of Allah. Now, I mentioned Khomeini. Khomeini met al-Banna in 1937. Khomeini, as you know, was Shiite Muslim. The Brotherhood is largely, mainly a Sunni movement. There are Sunni Arabs who are in the Brotherhood. Not all Sunnis are Muslim brothers, but most of the Muslim brothers are Sunnis. Now, or at least certainly at this time. So what's Khomeini doing here? Khomeini is here because he sees a purist teaching. He sees a teaching that is pure Islam. He sees a teaching that is glorious, that can restore legit authenticity to Islam in a time when that region is dominated by Western powers that are corrupting the region. And the main source of corruption in the West, of course, comes from the Jews. Right? I spoke a little bit earlier this morning, today, about Hajj Amin al-Husseini. Al-Husseini is a link between Nazis and the Muslim Brotherhood, which I discussed earlier today. But how does al-Husseini figure as a link to other groups that stem from the Brotherhood? In 1946, Hajj Amin al-Husseini brought the young Yasser Arafat to Egypt. Arafat's mother was the daughter of al-Husseini's first cousin. The daughter of al-Husseini's, the son of the daughter of al-Husseini's first cousin. So al-Husseini turned up in Egypt in July of 1946. He had fled as a wanted Nazi war criminal after his involvement in the extermination of the Jews in Europe. He brings Arafat. Now, why is this significant? Everybody knows something about Yasser Arafat. Where does he get his indoctrination, his training, his mentoring? In 2002, 2 years before his death, Arafat said that Hajj Amin al-Husseini was the greatest mentor he ever had, and he had always tried to follow in the footsteps of al-Husseini. Al-Husseini is Muslim Brotherhood. Al-Husseini saw to the first military training of Arafat through the Muslim Brotherhood. A lot of the military training that took place, by the way, at that time in the late 40s, was led by former German military figures. former Nazis. So, so you have this connection with Arafat in 1959 when Arafat founded Fatah. Al-Husseini was one of his counselors, in that process. Now, Hassan al-Banna was assassinated on February 19th, 1949. This brought about a little confusion in the leadership of the Brotherhood. There was, they had a leader. His brother was part of the leadership, but there was no one of the charisma of al-Banna. Sayyid Qutb was tied to the Brotherhood at this time. However, in 1948, Qutb went to America to study at a college of education, and he studied in a couple of places in America. But he was so horrified by the decadence of America that he returned 2 years in 1950 to Egypt, more passionately than ever, pursuing the ways of the Brotherhood, the teachings of the Brotherhood. He saw the Brotherhood as the only salvation from a world up to its neck in filth. Sometimes I wonder, what if he had come to the USA today? This is 1948, right? When you couldn't say damn on the radio, right? So, anyway, it's this, he knew, he had some sense in Egypt of the colonial contamination, all that, but when he was in America, he saw what he took to be the real decadence, the moral decadence, the absence of social justice, and of course, who's behind it? The Jews. Now, the Jew as the source of all evil is part of the category of the thinking, is a category in the thinking of the Brotherhood. So Qutb didn't come to that conclusion. He had that principle going with him into the United States. So in 1950, he began to emerge as an ideological leader in the Muslim Brotherhood. And soon thereafter, however, when Nasser came to power, the Brotherhood was suppressed in Egypt. Nasser, who had been in the Muslim Brotherhood, knew exactly the threat that the Brotherhood posed for his regime, which he didn't want to. Nasser was not about making Egypt into an Islamic republic. No. He was Muslim, but he's, as Uzi Rabi indicated this morning, he didn't envision Egypt as an Islamic republic. So he suppressed the Brotherhood. Qutb, wrote this text in 1950 called "Our Struggle with the Jews." It's reminiscent of Hitler's struggle, Mein Kampf. In that text, he sees the extermination of the Jews as a religious duty. Sayyid Qutb is by far the most influential jihadist ideologue in the Middle East. Everybody reads Qutb. I would say more influential than Hassan al-Banna. And these are some of his statements that jihad aims at converting all humans on the entire earth. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. How do I go back? Jihad aims at converting all humans on the entire earth. It is an expansionist militancy which aims at liberating the whole of mankind. This is in the name of freedom. This is in the name of purity. Beware of movements that promise purity. Where does the enslavement come from? It comes from the Jews. The Jews, he says, are the blackest devil and the source of the worst anti-Islamic machinations. They are the eternal enemy of Islam. They are the evil that plagues humanity, as clearly shown by the protocols of the elders of Zion. For Sayyid Qutb, jihadists in general, the protocols of the elders of Zion would not be considered another propaganda text or something to incite. No, it has the status of a proof text. If it's written in the protocols, it's therefore true. As you recall, those of you who were in the session this morning where I spoke, there are 3 texts invoked in the Charter of Hamas, the Charter of Allah, as proof texts. In other words, what I am saying is the case because it is written in the Quran, because it is written in the Hadith, and because it is written in the protocols of the elders of Zion. Notice that the Jews are the eternal enemy. What does it mean? It means that there is no end to fighting the Jews, to killing the Jews, until every Jew has been eliminated. Every Jew. One Jew is enough for the contagion to continue, the contagion that comes from the Jews. The Jewish state, then, exemplifies the Jewish Satan, so that the jihadist view of the Jews does not derive from the reestablishment of the Jewish state. It's the other way around. Their view of the Jewish state derives from what they've always taught about the Jews. The Jewish state is evil not because they have settled in someone else's land. No. Everybody settles in someone else's land. All over the globe, people settle in someone else's land. I mean, if you go over the centuries. That's not the evil. The evil is not that there are people living on a land where you think they shouldn't live. It's because they're Jews living on a land where they shouldn't live. That's why, otherwise, how could it exemplify Satan? They're not just colonialists, they're not just imperialists or whatever, they are satanic, they are demonic. It's not the presence of a hegemonic power, it's the presence of a demonic evil in their midst, which has to be opposed by any means necessary. Now, by the way, Sayyid Qutb was executed on the 29th of August 1966. While he was in prison, he wrote one of his most famous texts called Milestones, which has wide circulation. In the meantime, in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, the Brotherhood is sending people, missionaries and messengers out into the region. By the end of the 1950s, they had more than 50 centers in Sudan. And one of the most devoted adherents of the Brotherhood in Sudan was Hassan al-Turabi. As of 1977, al-Turabi was the leader of the Brotherhood in Sudan. In 1985, he changed the name of the Sudanese Muslim Brotherhood to the National Islamic Front because of, the term Muslim Brotherhood was politically charged. National Islamic Front was, less so. During the late 70s and 80s, when al-Turabi had ascended to this position of leadership, he convened several conferences of jihadist leaders from Hamas, from Fatah, from the Islamic Republic of Iran, from Hezbollah in the 80s. So Sudan became a center of gathering for jihadists of various kinds, Sunni and Shiite alike. Sudan was a home for Osama bin Laden for a time. One of bin Laden's wives was the niece of Hassan al-Turabi. So in June of 1989, al-Turabi was succeeded by Omar al-Bashir, a name that you perhaps know, as a man wanted for genocide. Al-Bashir was the leader of Sudan during the horrific genocides that took place in the south and around Darfur, which were programs of the Islamization of Sudan. Soon, also in the 70s, you have the emergence of the Islamic Republic of Iran in 1979. Now, I mentioned that Khomeini had studied with Muslim brothers. He was particularly devoted to Sayyid Qutb. In fact, Khomeini translated many, if not most, of Qutb's works into Farsi. Khomeini, as you know, is known for his diatribes against Israel, against the Jews, which is, another lecture unto itself. The first visit from a comrade in arms, so to say, to Khomeini right after the revolution in February 1979 was Yasser Arafat, who declared to Khomeini, the path we have chosen is identical. Right? And you can see them having a great time here. The path is identical. It's not exactly, certainly the aspiration is identical. How you get there is not necessarily identical. I mean, Arafat is not known for trying to establish Sharia law and this kind of thing, as Khomeini is. But I point this out just to suggest that, yes, there are differences in the tone and the extremity of various jihadist movements and groups, differences between Sunnis and Shiites, but there are also very deep similarities, and they see that themselves. One of the offshoots of the Iranian jihadist movement is Hezbollah. Now, you'll read many accounts of the founding of Hezbollah to say, well, Hezbollah came into being in the early 80s when the Israelis went into Lebanon and created this power vacuum in southern Lebanon, and so Hezbollah came into existence, as if it were the fault of the Israelis that we were having to deal with Hezbollah. Actually, according to Naim Qassem, the deputy secretary of Hezbollah, Hezbollah was founded in the 60s by these two figures, Musa al-Sadr and Mohammed Hussein Fadlallah. Hezbollah may not have had a presence in southern Lebanon until the early 80s, but Hezbollah existed prior to the early 80s. And of course, the current leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, is known for statements like this: use any means, Muslims must use any means at their disposal to kill Jews, for the Jews are satanic, they are behind all evil. If the Islamic aspiration is to create a pure world, a world of goodness and decency, a world purged of all evil, it has to be a world purged of all Jews. One of the offshoots of the Brotherhood in Egypt is Islamic Jihad, Egyptian Islamic Jihad, and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. An early figure in that breakaway, I guess you could call it a breakaway, was Fatih Shakaki. And the dispute arose, at least in part, because of the Camp David Accords and the agreement signed between Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat. It was said at the time, I'm probably the only one here who actually remembers that, but that Sadat just signed his own death warrant. And sure enough, in the Brotherhood, they had this discussion: what are we going to do about Sadat? Some of the brothers were saying, well, let's just proceed cautiously. Others said, no, we got to kill this guy. Shakaki was one of those who was all for killing this guy. Ayman al-Zawahiri was also implicated in the assassination of Sadat. Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri, who would become one of the leaders of Al-Qaeda. Once again, you see the Jew at the center of the discourse. Okay. Osama bin Laden, hatred of the Jews is part of our religion. You can't be a religious Muslim without hating Jews. It's a defining feature of Islamic righteousness, you see. Now, bin Laden studied at King Abd al-Aziz University in Jeddah. One of his teachers was Muhammad Qutb, the brother of Sayyid Qutb. He was also, even at that time, highly influenced by Abdullah Azzam. Abdullah Azzam is a key ideologue, jihadist brotherhood ideologue at that time. He was the Muslim Brotherhood representative in Damascus for a while. He was one of the authors of the Hamas Charter, and he had a very close relationship with Osama bin Laden. I mentioned already al-Zawahiri, Dr. al-Zawahiri also had very close relationship. Now notice, this is not an ignoramus. This is a highly educated person who says because the Jews control the West, they corrupt the West, so that the West does not know the language of ethics, morality, and legitimate rights. What do you do with a culture that is totally without ethics, without morality, and has no sense of rights? What's to be done with such a culture? Logically. Has to be eliminated. Has to be eliminated. You know about the Arab Spring. Part of what happened in the midst of the chaos of the Arab Spring was you have offshoots of the Brotherhood, of Al-Qaeda, going everywhere. ISIS, as you know, is an offshoot of Al-Qaeda. Its leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the Russians claim they killed him this year, but I'm not sure. In the past, rumors of his death were exaggerated, but perhaps, maybe they got him. But ISIS, too, has its target on the Jews, to all the Jews. Grandchildren of monkeys and pigs, we are coming for you. From all over the world. ISIS is all over the world. One of the self-proclaimed affiliates of ISIS is the National Tawhid Jamaat movement in Sri Lanka. they were in the news this last Easter. You recall the massacre of Christians in the churches. Now, of course, they're massacring Christians, crusaders. It's often said that what starts with the Jews doesn't end with the Jews. But what isn't so often elaborated on is why not? Why not? It's because the Jews represent an understanding of an infinite responsibility of each human toward the other that goes to the heart of the human being. If you eliminate that understanding of what a human being is, then you eliminate the prohibition against murdering other human beings. Of course, the Christians in particular were corrupted by the Jews. And Jesus was a Jew. So it's a problem. It's a problem. Some other offshoots, there's a connection between Islamic Republic of Iran and the Muslim Brotherhood through Khomeini, between Hezbollah and Islamic Republic. There's a connection between Islamic Republic and the Houthis in Yemen. The Houthis, Abdul Malik al-Houthi is the most famous Houthi. The Houthis are a family, not exactly a movement. But they are instrumental in creating the chaos in Yemen now. Uzi Rabi mentioned, the slaughter taking place in Yemen. In North Africa, we have Abdelmalek Drutkel, the leader of the Algerian Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. This is an offshoot of Al-Qaeda. Drutkel invokes the Jew crusader as the source of the evil plaguing Islam. Also, in parts of Africa, Iyad Agali, he's the head of a group called Ansar al-Din. You've read about, about Boko Haram, you know about ISIS. These groups identify themselves as, not just, some as supporters of ISIS, some as affiliates of ISIS. Boko Haram is another one. Drukdel, the head of the Algerian Al-Qaeda, trained fighters for Boko Haram. And Osama bin Laden provided aid to Boko Haram. Femi Vaughn will be here. He knows a lot more than Boko Haram than I do. And there are other gentlemen here whom I talked to this morning who I'm sure who's got, please forgive me, I don't recall your name. Recently in the news were jihadists in Burkina Faso. Dr. Shalom Koulibaly will be here. He's from this region and he can tell you more about that. But they too have ties with Boko Haram, with the Algerian Al-Qaeda of the Maghreb. Ahmed Umar, the head of Al-Shabaab, describes himself as part of ISIS, describes himself as a branch of Al-Qaeda. So these groups in Africa are wreaking havoc. Now, lest you suppose that the lines of influence stemming from the Brotherhood go only into Africa or throughout the Middle East and even into Europe. They're right here, not right here in River City. They're in the U.S. as well. Charles Small and Glenn Fader did some important research, not with just very modest assistance from me, on the National Students for Justice in Palestine in the United States. I guess that's up on the ISGAP webpage, flashpoints. Soon to be up. So you can take a look at this. I don't know if you can see the signs. It says Israel equals racism and genocide. What's to be done with a state that stands for racism and genocide? Another sign, you see this is a typical sign, resistance is justified. What does that mean? It means suicide bombings of buses are justified. In April, this last April, the NYU chapter of Students for Justice in Palestine was awarded the President's Service Award for their contributions to the community. A week later, Omar Barghouti, a founder of the BDS movement, the Boycott, Divest, Sanction movement, was prevented from boarding an airplane from Tel Aviv to New York because of his affiliation with various terrorist groups. He was going to New York to speak at an event held by the Students for Justice in Palestine. Now, if you watch for the appearance of this piece that Charles and Glenn Fader and I did, it traces the lines of connection between National Students for Justice in Palestine and various terrorist groups, largely by following the money. Follow the money. One of the organizations that they, vocally support is the PNIF, the Palestinian National and Islamic Forces group, which consists of these 5 terrorist organizations: Hamas, Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the Popular Front General Command, Palestine Liberation Front, and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. These groups are all on, the list of terrorist organizations. These groups are supported by the Students for Justice in Palestine, and the Students for Justice in Palestine receive support from these groups. So, the network of interconnections is complicated, it's vast, it's intricate. This is just kind of a sketchy, incomplete chart, just to give you an idea. Another way of kind of, extending the lines that I have started to draw between the Brotherhood and PLO, Sudan, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, Hamas, ISIS, Students for Justice in Palestine, and just a kind of a thing I put together with arrows. This should be like a big three-dimensional globe or something. So bottom line, the Muslim Brotherhood is not a largely secular, heterogeneous group that has eschewed violence. The Muslim Brotherhood is tied to, at various levels, most of the jihadist groups in the world. Most of the Islamic jihadist groups in the world have some tie to the Brotherhood. The Brotherhood has to be taken seriously. The movement of the Brotherhood into Europe and North America has to be taken seriously. It is taking place. They do have written programs of infiltration and takeover written up. They do have, as Uzi Rabi pointed out today, as Charles pointed out this morning, they do have their spokespersons in the mosques throughout Europe and North America. It's not just Africa, it's not just the Middle East. that's at stake here. So, be afraid, be very afraid. Any questions, comments? Yes, ma'am.
So I don't know if this touches on your research at all, but something that was screaming out to me the whole time watching your PowerPoint, which is very interesting, thank you, was we're seeing a lot of faces of men, and I think as we try to understand the ideologies of people who radicalize other people and people who become radicalized, people talk more and more about gender and sexuality in relationship to those things, especially as we see rape and sexual violence and fears of miscegenation as huge parts of racist and anti-Semitic movements. So I was wondering what your thoughts are about those two dimensions.
Well, that's a good question with several layers. You don't, actually I have a graduate student who is beginning a dissertation on the involvement of Muslim women in jihadist movements. If you ask Hamas, if you go to the Hamas charter and ask, well, what is the role of women? The charter says to have lots of babies and bring them up in the path of jihad. I'm sure you know that groups like ISIS are known for their sex trafficking and their serious abuse of women, treating women as property at best, and God knows how, at worst. But this goes to, a larger point of how do we understand the dearness of the other human being? What's the basis for it? The typical jihadist, someone like Sayyid Qutb, doesn't take women seriously, doesn't see women as capable of any deep insight or contribution to jihad except to bring up children to be jihadists. But it's, the treatment of women is a bigger topic than this, I think, that cuts across all kinds of societies and cultures. It's a good question. Yes?
Thank you again for a really compelling talk. What about Saudi Arabia? There's no mention of Saudi Arabian financing and Riyadh's perhaps blind eye toward how much funding for some of the groups mentioned come from Saudi Arabia, and some of that funding could be our tax dollars.
Yeah, well, yeah. Saudi Arabia is well known for funding jihadist movements, terrorist movements. The Saudis, officially, the Saudi government is not friendly toward groups like the Houthis or Hamas or these groups.
Al-Qaeda. I'm just asking, what kind of financing comes out of Saudi Arabia for some of these Al-Qaeda affiliates? I'm not saying even ISIS or some of the name escapes me right now in Somalia.
Al-Shabaab.
Al-Shabaab. And I'm not talking about the Saudi government necessarily. I'm talking about the government turning a blind eye from Saudi citizens sending money to these groups.
I don't know.
I'm
I'm sure it happens, but I'm sorry, I don't know any dollar amounts. How much? Yes, sir.
One question. A point on this, at least according to Harold Brode, the resolution to the attack on the mosque, the Grand Mosque in Mecca in 1979, which is 1400 in the Muslim calendar, was resolved by a deal between the Saudi royal family and the radical Muslims, that the Saudi royal family would fund the dissemination of Wahhabi jihadi ideology to the rest of the world and specifically to the West. That's part of the deal. That if you want to comment on that, but what I wanted to ask you was, I've read that initially the Muslim Brotherhood wasn't that successful, and that the real first great spurt of enrollment in the Muslim Brotherhood was at the time, first 36, 30.
That's correct.
And then in 48 with the war against Israel.
That's correct.
Israel, the attacks on the Yishuv were one of the great spurs to the success of the Muslim Brotherhood.
That's, everybody hear this point? What stoked the membership of the Brotherhood? They were moving along from 28, 29, 30. They had their propaganda division in 35. And the part of the propaganda was in support of Hajj Amin al-Husseini and the Arabs of Palestine. With the Arab revolt of 36, 37, 38, 39, almost 3 years, their membership went from about 200 to about 3,000 over those 3 years. And again, when the call went out, especially when, as you know, Benny Morris mentioned, the first stage of the war between the Arabs and the Jews in November 47, once again, you have this big enlistment into the Brotherhood to go fight. And the Brotherhood had their guys going to Palestine to fight. So yes, that was another boost in the membership. Saeed Qutb created another boost in the membership. Now, Nasser forced them underground. After the Six-Day War, what you heard from the Brotherhood and similar purist jihadist groups was, look at the punishment Allah has visited upon us. Nasser, right? He's humiliated us. So when Sadat came to power, he was trying to appease that element in Egyptian society. He let a bunch of the brothers out of jail. And they went on to kill him. So, times of crisis stoked the membership. Revolt in the 30s, the war in the late 40s, the suppression on the part of the Nasser regime in the 60s. Yeah, good point. Yes, ma'am.
So first of all, there are many things I want to thank you for. One of them is your take-home message from the last that you sort of repeated here about why is it that Jews are hated, and it's because you have to encounter the other, and that makes us vulnerable. And at the end of the day, that might be a way out of the fear, because we actually look at each other's humanity. In the meantime, your graph showed a whole lot of groups. I have two questions. One is, how much infighting is there among those groups? Are they really all part of Muslim Brotherhood, or are they a bunch of sort of federated groups? And then the other is kind of from the first question, a spin-off of that. You look at that picture as naming women. How aware, because I've met some people who are sort of probably friends of both sides. How aware do you think people are on the ground of sort of their umbrella? How aware are they of the money trail? Because, there's certainly a lot of dissonance there between, what the different things they're fighting for, the different kinds of liberation.
Yeah, the money, Charles has done a lot of research on this. The money trail is very intricate, and following it is very complicated. But it does produce results if you stick with it, right? So you can ask Charles about the money trail. Mohammed Morsi died not long ago, a couple weeks ago. And when he died, the leader of the Brotherhood in Jordan came out. His name is Abdul Malik al-Zunaybat, and he described Morsi as a victim of miscalculation, and Morsi was ousted in 2013 after he was elected in, 2010, I think. Anyway, but that threw them a curve. You ask about, infighting among them. How homogenous are they? You have basically, there are two groups of Brotherhood in general. They're the Castle Guardians and the Reformers. The Reformers tend to have more of a sense of realpolitik, that we have to take on a phased strategy, as Arafat called it, as we make inroads. And indeed, the plan for the Islamization of North America and Europe is largely not about using violence. It's the opposite. So you have that point of division. How violent do we get? Are we supposed to master the art of death or not? Right? I think also you'll find divisions where you find money. They're getting more than we are. What's the deal? Or power. Vying for money. Uzi this morning mentioned what he called a war between Gaza and West Bank. Fatah and Hamas both trace their origins to the Brotherhood, but now they are at serious opposition. That, in my opinion, is more about power than ideology. So, power struggle, money, resources, all of that always leads to discord, right? Let me get this off screen. So, there's not one uniform jihadist, world movement. They have their own splinters within them, yeah, which is to be expected, I think. Yes. Well, yes, ma'am. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
And your computer's still on, you might.
Here, I might just do that. Yes.
Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. My question is that when you showed Clapper, it was very important and very interesting. One of the things that has been underscored repeatedly since we started the conference was the failure to label and articulate what the serious problems are. In some cases, it's going to be the Islamist force that's growing and a danger to us. I want to go back to the incident during Charlie Hebdo attack, and when it's prior to Shabbos, and the kosher cache is attacked, and one of the Halabi brothers, who is really holding prisoners, makes it very clear. They have a record of what he said exactly about that this was not arbitrarily chosen. It was chosen as a Jewish target. And one of the things that occurred is that the Obama administration said that they arbitrarily chose, they wouldn't label it, they arbitrarily chose a location to get ordinary people purchasing food. One, this was before the Shabbos, this was a kosher store. The head of communications for the Obama administration, again, they asked her up and down, over 100 times, why isn't this being labeled? All of the Jewish press asked the same question. David from Goldberg, they have written on this. Have we made progress on labeling this as a concern about Jewish genocide?
I'm not sure. If you don't name the evil, you can't see the evil. Policemen who investigate crimes where Muslims are perpetrators, in many cases don't say there's a Muslim perpetrator. Ilan Omar recently said, this is according to Melanie Phillips, an article she wrote, according to her, Ilan Omar said that anyone who suggests that Muslims are anti-Semitic is Islamophobic,
Right.
which is like being an anti-Semite. So people are very leery of saying or naming what's in front of them. And this is a danger in academia. Yeah, Charles.
Just very quickly, I think to pick up on what Ellen said, I think that was a watershed moment. So this was in Paris when, on the eve of the Sabbath, Friday afternoon
Exactly.
in Paris, there was a young man from Cote d'Ivoire, his name was Mr. Koulibaly. He was a jihadist, and to reach God, to become a shaheed, he went into the kosher market on the eve of Shabbat, and he asked 4 men shopping in the kosher market before Shabbat if they were Jewish, and at point blank range assassinated them in the head. And the Obama administration, this was a watershed moment. President Obama himself said that this was a random act in some Delhi that was never walked back. And it goes exactly what Professor Patterson was saying. The administration refused to label this genocidal movement as a terror organization. And I think the silence of the academy and the silence of policymakers, not just in the United States, but around the Western world, we've inherited a serious problem that is in Europe, it's in North America, it's in the Middle East, as Uzi was showing, it's in parts of East and West, and North Africa, and even Southern Africa. This is a global problem that intellectuals and scholars need in an honest, rational, high-caliber way, not in a derogatory, nationalist, stereotypical way, but in a scientific manner, figure out what's happening, how to understand it, and once we begin to understand it, to find ways to grapple with this global crisis.
Part of understanding it lies in what you just said. This guy wants to be a shaheed. What does it mean? He's purchasing his ticket to paradise with Jewish blood. That's how you get into paradise. And Abdullah Azzam is among those known for saying, anyone who dies as a shaheed will enjoy 70 virgins, that sort of thing, which is I never found convincing. But what he adds, which makes you understand it even better, is that he brings salvation to 72 members of his family. That's why the families build shrines to these guys. These guys purchase entry into paradise for their family. Never mind the virgins. So, but he's not doing it out of bigotry. This is not reducible to bigotry. This is not reducible to racism. He's not looking for a scapegoat. He's trying to attain eternal salvation. That's what's driving the thinking here. That's the jihadist thinking. He's not some local, redneck who is going out to lynch people because they're the wrong color. That's not what he's up to. Yeah, Hussein.
I have a question about the rifles of the Muslim Brotherhood itself.
Yeah. You're asking me? I mean, you know about this better than I do.
Thank you. Very respected. So Salafists are the primary rivals. The Salafists, Wahhabis, meaning the Saudi version of Islam, are the primary rivals of the Muslim Brotherhood ideologically in the Muslim world. And a lot of these terrorist organizations, although their theology or jihad, their notion of jihad was based almost exclusively on psychotic literature.
Right.
The role it plays is just unbelievable.
Right.
A lot of them, the levels of observance were not Muslim Brotherhood observance. Like it was more of a Salafist observance. big of a threat to the stability of regionally and globally. I mean, we have the Saudi madrasas in Europe, right? That's their version of Islam.
Yeah, not just Europe, not just Europe.
Yeah.
Yes, the Salafists and the Wahhabis pose a similar kind of threat to destabilizing the region and beyond. I would say yes, precisely because of the fact that they are purist movements, and a purist movement can't tolerate contamination of any kind from anywhere. They have their influence. Even if I don't become a Wahhabi, I can be very sympathetic to the outlook, right? I'm not a Chassid, but I'm very attracted to Hasidic teaching and thinking. So they have their influence beyond the circle of their membership, I would say. And of course, Saudi money is all over the planet. It's in many of the academic institutions in the US and Europe. And where you have money, you have influence, right? Yeah, so it's a good point. Yeah, Carl.
Dave, I always enjoy hearing you, so thank you again. I'm really interested in this idea of like reproduction. I think someone had raised earlier the idea that so many forms of hatred sadly are reproduced socially, right? They're reified. Young people are taught to hate, right? And to despise and to be unkind. But there's also this other issue of reproduction that I think is so interesting. I would love for us to, or someone to help me unpack this idea that the physical reproduction is an important part of your promoting jihad or you're promoting hatred.
Right.
Where we need more young haters, right? And so the quote you had really stunned me. That's why I love the interdisciplinary aspect of our work, our curriculum building, the cross-cultural aspects of it. Triggers so many things, different pockets of knowledge. There was almost a perfect paraphrase to something you said earlier about the role is to reproduce, create more jihadists, the role for women. There is almost an exact parallel of misogynistic, and in fact, misogynoirist, like the hatred of black women. There's that whole field that's emerging. That was articulated during the Black Power movement. It was either Stokely Carmichael or Elder Speaker who said something very, very snotty. So said, well, what is the role of the woman in the movement? And he said, prone.
Right.
This has an impact. I mean, this is so powerful what we're doing.
Yes. Well, boy, you've opened up something that runs super deep. I've suggested that ideologies in general rest largely upon how we understand the value of a human being or the value of the other human being. How we understand the dearness of the human being goes to how we understand the family, how we understand marriage, how we understand bringing life into the world. What do you see when you hold an infant 5 seconds old in your hands and you look into those eyes? Some of you perhaps have done that. And if you're paying attention, it can make you wise. Suddenly you know what there is to love, why you live, why you die, what to fear for. You're a sage, you're a chacham. There's that. Or, I got another shaheed here, right? I got another one for the cause. So how do we view that babe in arms? How do we view that? How do we understand the event of birth? How do we understand the holiness of holy matrimony? How do we understand the family? Anti-Semitism has ramifications for all of that, I think. It's like Germany, Nazi Germany. If you look at portraits of the family in Nazi Third Reich art, you have a fertile Aryan woman, you got a bunch of kids, but there's no father. He's off serving the Fuhrer, and she's having babies for the Fuhrer. You know about the Lebensborn program. A breeding program. So, the Nazis undertake an assault not just on Jewish family and the concept of family, they undo their own concept of family. And it created, it reminds me that, that in the summer camps, the teenage boys, teenage girls would have their summer camps, and this happens everywhere. They're trying to get across the lake to see one another. In Nazi Germany, they helped them get across the lake. They wanted those teenage girls to go home pregnant. And it created an issue in German society. Even when the German parents are saying, hey, what's this? My daughter's got home pregnant, what's going on? But the apparatus of the Reich is promoting this. So you see, this is connected to the view of the Jew, I think. And it's an excellent point that you make. How do we understand reproduction? How do you understand child rearing, family, and everything else? Yes, Amy.
Can I just get back to the one question about women's role? Because I think we're being antiquated. And I think Al-Qaradawi said it best in setting out his priorities. And so I'd like to just quote for a second. He says, the Islamic movement and women activity. The Islamic movement has given attention to women since the dawn of the call. And then he goes on to Al-Banna, talks about Muslim sisterhood. And again, this antiquated notion of just reproduction, gone. In 1990, he makes it clear that the task of women should be to rise up a generation who would shoulder the burden carried by the men of the Muslim Brotherhood to play a significant role. And this will involve not just taking care of families and imprisoned brothers, but delivering food, supplies, money, and, by the way, education, which we see this really now. Very actively involved in education, and I'll talk about a little bit tomorrow. This is Linda Sassor and others. So this is the call. It's no longer just reproduction. These are the new advocates.
It's
So
also terrorism. You have Leila Khaled, who is the darling of the Students for the Justice of Palestine movement, and Linda Sarsour. She was the first female hijacker of TWA in the 1960s. Then you have Wafa Idris, who when Arafat, after he rejected the Clinton parameters and everything that President Clinton wanted to offer him in regards to having his own state, went on Palestinian television and said women should be a part of the Army of Roses. And Wafa Idris, who could not get pregnant, because she couldn't get pregnant, her husband left her. No one would marry her in Ramallah, so she decided to bring glory to her family, and she went and became the first female suicide bomber. So, and it didn't even start with the Palestinians, it started with the Chechens and the Black Widows. So you have always seen women be a part of this movement. It wasn't just for reproductive rights. It also became a way for them to show their feminism in a movement where, in a community where if they weren't able to have children, the way they were bringing glory to their family was by being martyrs.
Very good.
It was always there.
Yes.
Just finish that thought out when you said that this about how it connected to the views of the Jews. That this Nazi program is connected to their views of Jews.
Oh, the Lebensborn
Yeah.
program? Their views of the Jews rest upon what they take to be a dangerous teaching from the Jews concerning what constitutes the sanctity of a human being, what constitutes the holiness of marriage, therefore, and family. You have to get rid of that teaching about marriage and family in order to implement a Lebensborn program, right? A breeding program.
If I may, one more thing. I think it was so important when you make the point that this notion of the killing of a Jew is seen as Allah's will and something that gets you into heaven. And I think it's very hard for people in the West, even religious people, to understand that sense of religious devotion where that seems to override our sense of any kind of morality where killing was good. But what is it like for the people who are in that culture, right, who do believe that?
Well, that's a good question. They're taught from the womb. I mean, you can ask, we have a young man here who can speak to education and cultural upbringing in a Muslim anti-Semitic society. And we have, I mean, you know, sometimes at least with my students, their goodness gets in the way of their education. They can't imagine. Who would want to do this? How can anyone think that? And I just look at them with love and say, you sweet, innocent young man, young lady. You know, Yitzhak Katznelson in his diary from the Vitel concentration camp, he perished in the Holocaust, said, "Blessed are we that we couldn't believe it. We didn't have it in us to believe this evil was coming." Yes.
I was going to make this remark before, but it's even more relevant now. Part of this behavior, from exterminating a designated enemy to turning your children into breeding and harming, are characteristic of millennial movements. That is, movements that believe that they are bringing collective salvation to the earth now. And it's under those conditions that you can throw away all the restraints because you're working for collective redemption.
That's an interesting point. Millennial movements, the apocalypse is at hand. The eschaton is upon us. We have nothing more to lose. We have only this higher aim to attain at all costs. Right. I mean, that kind of thinking makes for evil. It opens the door to the spread of a lot of evil. You know, the Talmud tells us, if you're planting a tree and somebody tells you the Messiah is here, come on, finish planting the tree and then go check it out. Yeah. Right? It's...
And that was a rebuke to Akiva, who recognized Bar Kokhba as the Messiah.
Very good. So, you see how these last day scenarios lead to catastrophic results. Yes.
I'm curious about Hamas winning over potential voters because of their social service program. And why it obviously succeeded because, if I recall, in the Bush administration, he was pushing for a vote in Gaza because the assumption was Hamas was going to lose, not win.
Yes, I think that was a calculation on several levels. Of course, looking back, it's easier than anticipating a future. But I mean, Hamas is often presented as an organization that provides for people's welfare and their care and their comfort and so on. But Hamas has a vested interest in keeping their people dependent on them and keeping them in some state of misery. So I'll vote for the party that feeds me. I'm sure there's some of that at work, but I think there's also what's going to happen to me if I don't vote for them. My guess is that elections in Gaza are not altogether free elections, you know. So, when was the last election?
2006.
One man, one vote, one time.
One time. Yeah. Well, if you vote for me, you can have some coffee. So, thank you all. Thank you.